Surprise! Snap packs just dropped, and with them came 3 new cards, all available in the new Series 4 pack, and trust me on this, they might be better than any Series 4 card we've ever seen before. Card number 1 is Batroc the Leaper. This is a 1/2. When a card moves, follow it to gain +2 power once per turn. This is a card that is a massive boost to the Scream archetype, and in my opinion, might end up being one of the strongest Series 4s, if not the strongest Series 4 of all time. Now, it does have that once per turn restriction, without which I strongly suspect it would be even better. But this is a card that takes the Scream archetype's arguably second best draw, but what I think might secretly be its best draw, which is Sam Wilson into Kraven, and add even more scaling on top of that. Since the Sam Wilson shield always happens at the beginning of the game, or at the beginning of the turn, this will move with the Sam Wilson shield every single time, and so that means you can basically guarantee move it to the Sam Wilson lane, move it to the Kraven lane. Kraven doesn't get +2, he'll get +4. Batroc will also get +2. Suddenly what's happening is when you're moving to the Sam Wilson lane, that is a +4 bit of scaling. When you're moving to the Kraven lane, that is a +6 bit of scaling. That is a crazy, crazy boost to a deck that already doesn't have a lot of good one-drops, if any. This adds real nut draw potential to the deck, although it does sort of push the deck more towards a green power, aka weak to Shadow King in basically every lane kind of thing. I think that this card is very clearly going to be good by virtue of being a good card that goes in an already good deck and synergizes with what that deck is already trying to do. That is a very clear recipe for this being a card that is worth picking up. It is probably the most exciting of these 3 cards that recently dropped, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention Hydra Stomper in this, because as far as I'm aware, these cards are set to come out the moment that the patch happens, right? And that is planned to be, hopefully you're watching this video at around 11 a.m. in the morning, which means there's still a couple hours before Hydra Stomper comes out. But when Hydra Stomper comes out, suddenly if you have Batroc into Sam Wilson, instead of Sam Wilson making Hydra Stomper have 6 power total, because you move the thing 4 times, you get Batroc. Sam Wilson is also moving the Batroc, which means that you're getting 2 moves every time the Sam Wilson shield moves, which means that Hydra Stomper is 10 power. This is a card that is crazy. Like, this is suddenly like the kind of card that enables a Hydra Stomper. This card, I think, is going to be a big part of move mid-range, which I think will really exist. Scream has already been around, and Scream herself has in large part been the focus. But with the large amount of Red Guardians running around, and the fact that you kind of only have a 50-50 shot at protecting the Scream under a Sam Wilson shield, I feel like the Sam Wilson Kraven stuff has actually been a much more dangerous opening in that deck, in large part because there's not nearly as much sort of lost equity from leaving a Scream until later. Getting your Sam Wilson Kraven stuff down very early, or now Sam Wilson Batroc and Kraven, gives them more time to scale up, where Scream is basically always going to be good as long as you get like 2 hits off of her. So if you go Scream plus Spider-Man on 4, that's basically fine. You're only really playing like 3 to 4 movers of your opponent's cards in the first place. So getting down the Sam Wilson, getting down the Kraven, that kind of stuff has been better. Sam into Kraven is my preferred. If I had all 3 in my hand, I would do Sam into Kraven on 2-3, Scream on 4 with some other stuff, basically all of the time. And Batroc adds to that. And I think that maybe Hydra Stomper adds to that. And suddenly Scream goes from a deck that maybe doesn't actually need to be a Scream deck anymore because it has all this stuff. I think it still wants to be because it's not a huge ask to do it, but it becomes a deck that is suddenly very, very full. A lot of what's been happening with Scream decks recently has been, what are we hybridizing with? We had the Lady Deathstrike Uncle Ben hybridization, we had the Darkhawk hybridization. Now, I don't really think we're hybridizing at all. I think we're going to have 10 solid cards, 2 tech cards, that's the Scream deck. Batroc's going in this deck. entirely possible that he brings Hydra Stomper along with him. But what I really think that this card does is place a massive emphasis on the card Sam Wilson. This card is Sam Wilson's absolute best friend. The absolute thing that you want to be doing with this card is putting it in every Sam Wilson deck. And inasmuch as Sam Wilson did just get nerfed, I think it is a really bold choice to release a card like Batroc in a world where they just nerfed Sam and Scream, because to me, this is looking a lot like a deck that has the potential to be the best mid-range core in Marvel Snap right after you nerfed two of the cards that made it that previously. On the other hand, while this is a very good thing to be doing, this is suddenly a deck that is full and will need to adopt tech cards in order to play things. Here's the other thing that having Batroc in your deck does. It means that you're not a good Killmonger deck. It means that you are actively hurting yourself when you're a Killmonger deck. It also means that Killmonger is pretty good against you. Cards like Killmonger and Red Guardian, the other best decks in the game right now. I mean, I think Thanos is the #1 contender, if not already the best deck in the game. The ongoing version is very, very strong and very weak to Killmonger, and now you are a deck that, like, maybe you don't even have the room to do that kind of stuff. Batroc is a card that I think will massively impact the meta, but I also think that there's this weird thing that happens in Marvel Snap where as a deck gets stronger, it also gets weaker as things that target it because of its strength are able to be more justifiable in other decks. So while I do think that Batroc is going to be very strong, I do think that it's going to make Sam Wilson look kind of ridiculous because it's another synergy piece for Sam Wilson. It would not surprise me at all if just running Sam and Batroc and stuff and just high rolling that ended up being a pretty reasonable, if not a very good thing to do. But I do think that it is a sort of solvable problem because of the very nature of these cards. They are taking up spots on the board. Batroc is a very vulnerable one-drop. If you are counting on him to win a lane, you might not always be able to. Decks are already incentivized to run Killmonger because of all the Thanos stuff. I think this stuff is going to be strong, but I also think it's going to be the fair-ish or fun-ish kind of strong. There is something not fun about this. It's going to be the massive delta between Batroc in games where you do have Sam Wilson and Batroc in games where you don't. This might mean that there's going to be a lot more actual attempts at just turning off Sam Wilson because he is going to be the linchpin of these Craven Batroc strategies. He's going to be the thing that makes it free. Turn off the Sam Wilson. Suddenly these cards are fairly mopey. They're not doing all of that stuff. It really puts the focus onto him. And I'm a little surprised that they felt the need to make a card like this, especially given we got like a month to wait for a patch. Like, I realize that original Zabu was legal for a month, and this is pretty far from that. But it is surprising that they'd be willing to do this in a world where they just nerfed the cards that this card goes with. This is a card that might only be scary to me, but it is a doozy of a scary card, in my humble opinion. Topaz is a 3/4 that moves any card played here to the middle location. I think basically everyone can understand why this scares me. You should pretty much be able to understand that. And it scares me because it might be a move bounce card. This is a card that, let's put your Madam Web in the middle, let's put your Topaz on the right lane, you play your things into the Topaz lane, they go to the mid lane, then you can move them out. It is just, it's very free. If not a move bounce card, in large part because it costs 3, this is definitely the kind of card that would go in like a Heimdall bounce deck, where you're just looking for all those extra procs if you can. A reusable kind of fixed Hercules is sort of how I understand this. If a card like this is ever going to be good, it is going to be Topaz because of just how unique and powerful this effect can be. So much of move gameplay is based on the ability to double up and triple up on the move effects of cards like Dagger and Vulture and Human Torch. And this is a card that effectively lets you do that for free. I think it's an extremely, extremely powerful card that absolutely has to be respected. And I think it could lead to a genuine move renaissance. Maybe the fact that Scream is a deck that looks like it's going to be so powerful might push against that, but I think that like a Heimdall move style deck definitely wants this card. A move bounce style deck, I think, will likely want to try this card at least, if only for the free moves, because the move bounce deck is predicated on reusing your free moves. This is effectively a card that, while more expensive than a lot of those cards, is a reusable source of moves. You really, really care about that. Now, there are some weaknesses here, like with every move deck, especially because this is a card that really wants to stay on the board. It's vulnerable to things like Red Guardian, but this is a card that notably is not an ongoing, so it's not vulnerable to Rogue, it's not vulnerable to Shang-Chi, it's just there. That's a really unique spot for a card like this to be in. And I think that this is a card that has some genuine potential to be a legitimately strong card in the metagame in the context of the Heimdall move deck, which is likely, not 100%, already a better fit for Hydra Stomper than the move bounce deck. Fan Fei is an interesting card, a 4/7 with activate moving all of the cards at the location to the right. Notably, and this is kind of an important thing, that's the opposite direction that Heimdall moves them in. So you can do some very fun like this and Heimdall type stuff. Two of these cards really do strike me as boosts to Heimdall move that are pretty difficult to use in move bounce. But at 4/7, this is just a card that is solid on rate. I think the floor on this is like the Stegron of Heimdall move decks, and the ceiling on this is massive. I think this card could actually just straight up be good generally, just by being a 4/7 that makes your opponent take guesses about where the hell your cards are going to be at any given time. There's some real strength in just effectively turning all the other cards at the location that you play this at into a vision. I kind of am interested in this card generally, but I think like the best decks that use this card are going to be cards that actually synergize with the move stuff for pretty obvious reasons. That said, it is a 4-cost activate, and 4-cost activates have a very limited window in which to actually be good. One of the things that I've been looking at for activates is when would it make sense for a card to be an activate, and a lot of the answer is when it can actually take advantage of the unique time window after turn 6 plays that activates have access to. This is definitely a card that can do that. This is a card that you can say, I want to have this effect on the board and invest in it so that I can use it on turn 6 or really after turn 6 in sort of the same way that Bullseye is used in the discard deck. This is a card that reminds me of that. Like, this is a card that could be anywhere from a role player to a star, and the only thing that I think really holds it back is the history of 4-cost activates is not great, and sometimes moving to the right is not what you want, and that's the kind of stuff that makes me think that the floor on it is more Stegron, the ceiling on it is very, very high, and it seems like we might be moving right back in to a move metagame. So what does this mean for the metagame? I expect Batroc to be a card that people immediately react to, not necessarily negatively, I would imagine very positively, but I expect the reaction among creators to be, what are they doing? That is so good. Oh my God, Sam Wilson. And I think that it will likely end up being in the range of balanced. Like, the deck as a whole might end up a little bit too strong, but not like the kind of game-ruining things that you would expect from reactions like that would be my guess. I know this sounds weird, but like, Batroc juices your Scream Sam Craven draws, whatever, I sleep. A potential at reviving move bounce, real shit. Like, that's what's happening to me right now. It's like, everyone's going to be talking about the Batroc stuff, and I think he's going to be good, but ultimately, like, just a big guy. And Marvel Snap has had metagames where there's a guy who's too big for too cheap for too long. It's rarely been a 1-cost, especially a 1-cost that you have to invest in, although I'm not sure playing and drawing Sam Wilson is all that much of an investment. If there's a problem with Batroc, it's just going to be how medium he is when you don't draw Sam Wilson and how completely insane he is when you do. But generally speaking, the stuff I'm really looking at as far as this goes, there's going to be a lot of people looking at Batroc and being like, it costs 1 and it's like 20 power. And it's like, yeah, but also you're doing all this other stuff to actually make that happen that way. I'm not saying I don't think the card's going to be good, but I'm saying I think it's going to be good in an understandable way that has meaningful counterplay, like Killmonger and Shadow King, and it's not going to be the end of the world. The stuff I'm worried about is stuff that doesn't have meaningful counterplay. Move, bounce stuff, or even the Heimdall move with Cosmo and Eliath to shut down. That's a really scary deck to give boosts to. And I think a lot of that is down to the counterplay, right? Like, whoa, I'm going to counterplay you. No, you're not. I'm a Cosmo Goliath deck. Whoa, I'm going to counterplay you. No, you're not. I've put all the cards that you care about into my hand, and you have priority because all my cards are in my hand, and you can't do anything to deal with me. And so I just play out a 48 power Human Torch, and you cry yourself to sleep, and that's just kind of how it goes. And so you have this deck, these kinds of decks, where I think on balance, the Scream deck tends to be good a larger percentage of the time due to its consistency. But giving enough tools to move bounce or to Goliath Cosmo bounce or to Goliath Cosmo move is a very scary prospect to someone like me who I don't really know a nice way to say this. I think that stuff gets way, way better at the top of the ladder. That stuff gets way, way better and way, way harder to deal with when you're facing people who know what you're doing too and know how to play those decks against what you're doing. Whereas a Batroc thing, I think a lot of what makes mid-range decks like that appealing is that they are easy to understand why they're strong. Look at how much numbers I'm getting for how little investment, right? Like, that matters. But I do think that they have a much more standard skill curve where, a player at rank 70, like actual 70, is not going to play it much differently than a player who's at infinite rank 70. You know what I mean? There's going to be some different levels of understanding, but the actual play choices are going to be fairly similar because the deck doesn't really have too many differences between the lines you can take. Which 2-drop scalar are you playing on too? I mean, they're all pretty damn good. And so you end up with a deck that has a much straighter skill curve versus a deck that has a much more narrow skill curve. And I'm obviously scared of the narrow one because if Scream is too good, I'm not really worried that they'll nerf it, but it took them a while to nerf move bounce last time because it was only really a problem at the top end, and I'm worried about that. All that is to say, I think it's likely that Batroc is the best of these cards, but he's also the least scary because I understand him. I understand what Batroc is going to be. He's going to be a lot of stats for not a lot of energy. I get that. We've had that before. I'm not even sure he'll be enough stats to beat out ongoing Thanos, but he's going to be a lot of stats for not a lot of energy. The other cards are scary because I don't know where they're going to land. And that's where I'm at on this. All right, y'all. I'll be streaming later today. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.